It turns out that this story is about a joy that is found when we receive God's love in the depths of our souls and participate in hope in the midst of our situations. Even in this Christmas season, a couple weeks ago, we read Mary's song, this song of praise that she sings when she finds out she is pregnant with this Savior. She says in Luke chapter 1, in verse 44, he has come to the aid of his servant Israel, remembering his mercy just as he promised to our ancestors, to Abraham and Abraham's descendants forever. It's like Mary learned something from thousands of years of suffering, how to be joyful or how to have joy in the midst of their situations. What I love about this story is we can also bear witness to the ways in which God's people find solidarity and suffering with one another. When Mary finds out she's pregnant, she goes to her cousin Elizabeth, her much older cousin Elizabeth, right? And shares this with her. And you might miss it in the story if you're not paying attention, but it says that Mary stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months. This slow, deep solidarity that they shared with one another in the midst of their situation. Learning about joy from people who are suffering, I feel like has been actually a bit of a journey that God has had me on personally for quite a long time. I've shared countless times here that when I was in my 20s, I played in a band. I share that a lot because it makes me feel cool as the older I get. But one of those seasons in the band, we toured Guatemala, around Guatemala City, and then we went to 17 different villages, partnered with a feeding program in all of these different villages all over the country. And we would have these events, like we'd go in for the day, and we would set up all these games for the kids to play, and the kids would earn these like tickets for winning these games. It was like Chuck E. Cheese for Guatemalan kids in villages. And they could take their tickets, and then they could like buy like school supplies and clothing and candy and things that kids love. And at the end of the night, we would gather the whole village together, and our band, our American band, would do a concert for the village. And it was just amazing, these 17 villages, and they all have their different challenges. And some of them, like they would get one big meal a week when the program was there, right? Like, I mean, real challenges. And at night, these families in these villages would gather. And I remember the children, while we played, they would just dance and sing and laugh. And they were filled with so much joy. I remember being in my 20s being like, man, I don't know this joy. I don't know this kind of joy. I mean, many of them wearing the only clothing they have. I don't know this kind of joy. This Christmas season, I signed up to get a daily email. It's like an Advent devotional or reader, all written by Christians who are in Gaza right now. Just some light reading for the holidays. And I'm reading these stories where avoiding suffering is not an option. Yet they are moving through the same themes of Advent we are. And so they're writing about things like peace and joy and love and hope. And many of them talk about looking for Jesus, the story of Jesus in the rubble. I can tell you, looking across this room over the last couple years as your pastor, I've learned about joy from many of you that have gone through seasons that I don't know that I would have made it through. But you've made it through, and they're still talking about this God who is with us. This is joy. It's something different than happiness or bliss. It's something deep in our souls. And I think this kind of joy is something that God's people are well practiced in, that we are well practiced in, yes, this is my situation, and there is another story too. And God is with me, and it's in these places that we learn joy. I find it interesting in Luke chapter 2, what the angel says to these shepherds is the angel says, don't be afraid, and then says, look, I bring good news to you, wondrous, joyful news for all people. It's look implies this like paying attention. It implies this like opening up your eyes to the whole situation. It's not like I bring you good news in avoidance of your pain. It's not I bring you good news as a balm or a medicine for your pain. It's like I bring you good news in the midst of your situation. This child is born. This God is with us in the midst of all of it. Now, I don't know your propensity for suffering. I've been doing a lot of reflecting around suffering in my own life. I think most of us have some kind of a propensity towards suffering that is either like we become really like enmeshed and caught up in suffering, like super tied to it. And then some of us have a propensity towards suffering that is like total detachment and avoidance. And most of us live in some kind of like, it's like a spectrum, right? And maybe we move around depending on who it is and what's going on. But what I'm learning about me is that I have a propensity towards enmeshing with other people's suffering and detaching from my own. That I can be all in on someone else's suffering and doing everything in my power to alleviate them from their suffering, while paying no attention to the ways in which I suffer as well. I'm learning this actually in my body right now. I'm getting older every year. I don't know if you are, but I am. I'll be 40 in a year. And somewhere along the way, I played a lot of hockey growing up, full contact hockey. I took a lot of hits. And in that time, I was trained to not listen to my body. In fact, it's like great pride among hockey players about how injured you can play and keep going. And so my body, my brain is used to shutting off the literal pain that's happening inside of my body. And so I've been in a season where I've been having some neck problems. Probably got hit when I was really young, and now my body is getting back at me. And there was points this year where I was in so much pain that for weeks I would sleep just a couple hours a night. And then I would putz around the kitchen in my socks all night, trying to pass the night away. And as I've met with doctors, massage therapists, and chiropractors, and physical therapists, and they ask me details about my pain. They want to know what it's like so they can understand what's going on in my body. You know what my problem is? I don't know. I can't describe it. I've never listened to the pain in my body before. Actually, my brain is wired to completely detach from the pain happening in my body. And I wonder sometimes in the pursuit of happiness or bliss, in the pursuit of something else, that we have this unhealthy relationship with suffering. And then as we move through seasons of suffering, we talk about things like joy, we can't even conceptualize it, because our relationship with suffering is all sorts of messed up. And I wonder in this season if God might be teaching us something about joy, not in spite of suffering, but in the midst of suffering, your suffering and their suffering. Yes, we learn joy with those who have suffered. That's long been the Christian tradition, but we also learn joy in relationship to our own suffering. I think this is something that the Jews always knew in their head, right? They always had these songs, these traditions to remind themselves that God was with them in their suffering. But in the Jesus story, in the gospel story, in the New Testament, we're watching as these individuals begin to maybe internalize it through the incarnation of Christ and discover this Emmanuel, God with us, in a very located, real way in their heart as well. Later in the story, as Jesus is preparing for the cross, he's more and more helping his disciples, his followers, understand what's about to come. And in John chapter 16, he's the most clear about what's about to happen that he is anywhere else in the Gospels. And the disciples, these apostles, these followers, they're very confused. They're like, wait, what? You're going to leave us? You're going to suffer? And these are Jesus' words of encouragement to his followers on this day, John 16, verse 20. I assure you that you will cry and lament, and the world will be happy. How encouraging is that? Are you hearing this though? In common terms? Like you're going to be in the midst of your suffering and you're going to look at all those people over there and they're going to seem so happy. Have you been there? He goes on, you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn to joy. And then he references childbirth. I wonder if he wants his followers to maybe remember the story. He says, when a woman gives birth, she has pain because her time has come. But when the child is born, she no longer remembers her distress because of her joy that a child has been born into the world. In the same way, you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and you will be overjoyed. And listen to this sentence. No one takes away your joy. No one takes away your joy. So I think this is good news among the early listeners. See, the Jews had longed for a Savior who would save them from their situation. And what they learned was this Emmanuel would be good news in the midst of their situation. And that Jesus, that his part of his calling, part of his mission, part of his goal was also to redeem the soul of his people. Like both things are happening, right? This Emmanuel, this announcement is good news because God is with us in the midst of our situation, but he also is redeeming our souls, the depths of who we are and how we view the world. Now, I think the opposite maybe is true or difficult for us in American Western Christianity because over the last 100 years, we have been hyper-focused on a Savior who saves souls, often despite our situation. That we've often bypassed people's situations in attempt to try and save people's souls. It turns out that this story is about a joy that is found when we receive God's love in the depths of our souls. That when we can receive God's love in the depths of our souls and participate in hope in the midst of our situations. Can I say that one more time? It turns out that this story, that it's about a joy that is found when we receive God's love in the depths of our souls and participate in hope in the midst of our situations. Now, I'm going to be honest. As I'm working on this message, I'm having all the same questions that probably you're having, right? But why? Why is there suffering in the world? Can't God just fix it? Why won't God just change it? Why can't God just intervene so we can have no more suffering in the world? And the truth is, I could write papers about this. I'm pretty sure in college and seminary I've written papers about this. But can I tell you the truth? I don't know. I don't have a theological answer that would hold weight in the life of someone's actual stories. I don't know. But what I do know is what this story is about and what it invites us into. It invites us to recognize this Emmanuel, this God who is with us, this joy that can be learned in the midst of our situations, this joy that can be found in the midst of our situations, this joy that is possible in the midst of our situation, this joy that can be learned in the depths of our soul, this joy that can be found in the depth of our soul, this joy that is possible in the depth of our souls, this joy that is learned together, this joy that is found together, this joy that is possible together. That on this Sunday, we join Christians all around the world to wrestle with what it might mean to experience joy in Emmanuel, God with us.